The waitress spotted the red on his chest and moved instantly, saving the Mafia boss's life. It was supposed to be just another uneventful evening at the restaurant until Emily, a shy and kind waitress, noticed something no one else did. A tiny red dot glowing on the chest of the man sitting in the corner. Little did she know, the man she was about to save was one of the most feared Mafia bosses in the city. In one brave instant, Emily's world was turned upside down. Her split-second decision would change everything. Not only saving his life, but uncovering a dangerous secret hidden deep inside the criminal underworld. But why did she risk everything for a stranger? And what happened after that moment when their lives became forever connected? Stick around until the end of the story because what comes next will knock your socks off. And before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what city you're watching from in the comments. This is a story about courage, fate, and the unexpected bond between a Mafia boss and the waitress who saved his life. The restaurant hummed softly with conversation and the clinking of glasses. Emily, a quiet and kind waitress, moved gracefully between tables, balancing plates and smiles. She had no idea that tonight would change her life forever. The Gilded Cage was the kind of restaurant where anonymity was a luxury, and the true price of a meal was the discretion of the clientele. The atmosphere, a blend of velvet, dark wood, and the glow of strategically placed candlelight, contributed to an illusion of normalcy. The restaurant buzzed softly with chatter and clinking glasses. Emily was a perfect fixture in this environment. In her late 20s, she possessed a gentle, reserved demeanor and a deep-seated commitment to her work. She wasn't seeking excitement or ambition. She was seeking stability, working the double shifts required to maintain her small, struggling family outside the city's glamour. She moved gracefully between tables, balancing plates and smiles, her practiced professionalism concealing the constant worry of her life. To the patrons, Emily was simply the good one, the quiet waitress who always brought the right order and never complained. Her kindness was genuine, a small, quiet act of faith in a world she often found overwhelming. She performed her tasks mechanically, her mind focused on her financial goals. She had no idea that tonight would change her life forever. She expected only exhaustion and tips. She did not expect destiny to arrive at table 7. At the corner table sat a man everyone seemed to fear, Luca Moretti, the notorious Mafia boss. His presence drew whispers, but Emily treated him like any other customer. The sudden drop in the room's temperature and the noticeable tension among the staff signaled the arrival of the inevitable. At the corner table sat a man everyone seemed to fear, Luca Moretti, the notorious Mafia boss. Luca, in his mid-30s, was the figurehead of the Moretti family, a man whose quiet power surpassed any overt display of force. He was handsome, severe, and his presence was a palpable heavy weight that governed the behavior of the entire establishment. His presence drew whispers, hushed and fearful, among the patrons who recognized the silent authority he wielded. The staff, trained to move around him with surgical precision, knew the rules. Absolute deference, zero mistakes, and most importantly, no eye contact. Emily, however, approached his table with the same polite, professional neutrality she offered the loud hedge fund manager at table 4. She treated the quiet, dangerous man like any other customer, not out of defiance, but out of the sheer necessity of her work. She was too focused on her task to allow herself the luxury of fear. When their eyes met, she noticed something strange. Behind his cold gaze, there was a shadow of sadness, a quiet anomaly. Luca was observing her. He was accustomed to fear and reverence. He was not accustomed to neutral, professional service. He was analyzing her, searching for the fear that defined every other soul in his orbit. As Emily placed his glass of water on the table, their eyes met for a fleeting, intense moment. When their eyes met, she noticed something strange. Behind his cold gaze, there was a shadow of sadness. It was a profound, agonizing loneliness that pierced the icy mask of his authority, a brief, vulnerable crack in the armor of a dawn. The sadness was quickly suppressed, replaced by the familiar intensity, but the glimpse was enough. Emily's professional detachment faltered. She saw not the monster of the city, but a man in profound, isolated pain. The ordinary night had just become extraordinarily personal. As Emily cleared a nearby table, she noticed a flicker of red light reflecting on Luca's chest. At first, she thought it was a trick of the restaurant's neon sign until it moved. Her heart froze. The quiet, unsettling realization of Luca's sadness lingered in Emily's mind. She continued her duties, moving around the powerful table, but her attention was now subtly heightened. Focused on the anomaly of the vulnerable man in the corner, she approached a nearby table to clear the dessert plates, her hands moving with their practiced rhythm. As she worked, her gaze flickered across Luca's table. She registered the reflection of the city lights on the polished surface of his suit. She noticed a flicker of red light reflecting on Luca's chest. It was a small, precise point of intense color. At first, she thought it was a trick of the restaurant's neon sign, a common occurrence in the reflective atmosphere of the gilded cage. She tried to dismiss it, to return to the safety of her routine, until it moved. The spot of red light, perfectly circular and unnaturally bright, shifted fractionally on the fabric of Luca's expensive suit. It was not a static reflection. It was focused, precise, and controlled. The realization hit Emily with the force of a physical blow. Her professional detachment shattered. Her heart froze. She recognized the terrifying, unmistakable signal from movies and reports. That wasn't a reflection. It was the red dot of a sniper's laser. The threat was immediate, lethal, and aimed directly at the man she had just seen weep with his eyes. The sniper was positioned somewhere in the high-rise buildings across the street, waiting for the perfect quiet moment to execute the hit. Without thinking, she dropped the tray and lunged at Luca, knocking him to the floor. A loud gunshot shattered the window. Screams filled the room. The knowledge gave Emily no time for rational thought, no time to calculate the immense, fatal risk she was about to take. Her inherent kindness and the immediate threat to the man she had just seen as vulnerable overpowered her instinct for self-preservation. Without thinking, she dropped the tray, the expensive china crashing onto the marble floor with a deafening sound. The noise was the warning. She launched herself forward, her body moving with a desperate, sudden force. She lunged at Luca, knocking him in his chair violently backward, crashing them both to the floor behind the solid protection of the table. The movement was chaotic, undignified, and entirely effective. The instant Luca's body was pulled from the line of sight, the inevitable occurred. A loud gunshot shattered the window behind the table, the report a sickening crack that tore through the restaurant's quiet ambience. The bullet struck the wall precisely where Luca's head had been moments before, embedding itself deep into the mahogany paneling. The planned, quiet execution had been sabotaged by a waitress. Screams filled the room. The chaos was absolute. The elegant restaurant dissolved into a frenzy of terrified patrons diving for cover, confusion, and raw terror. Emily lay sprawled across Luca, breathing heavily, the remnants of her composure utterly destroyed. But the man was alive. She had saved his life and plunged herself irrevocably into the heart of his dangerous world. Luca's men rushed in, pulling their guns. Emily trembled as she realized she had just saved the life of one of the most dangerous men in the city. The restaurant was a scene of pandemonium. The gunshot and the shattering glass were immediately followed by the decisive, terrifying intervention of Luca's personal security. Luca's men rushed in, pulling their guns, their movements swift and professional, securing the perimeter and sweeping the ceiling for the sniper's location. Emily lay pinned beneath Luca, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. The deafening noise of the gunshot was replaced by the chaotic sounds of command and fear. The gravity of her action, the full, lethal cost of her intervention, crashed over her. Emily trembled as she realized she had just saved the life of one of the most dangerous men in the city. She had thrust herself from invisibility into the very center of his violent, high-stakes world. Luca, reacting with the primal instinct of a survivor, immediately pushed himself up, his eyes sharp and scanning the room for secondary threats. He was alert, furious, and entirely focused on the immediate danger. The bodyguards quickly confirmed the location of the sniper and neutralized the area. The immediate threat was gone. Luca, however, remained on the floor, his eyes fixed entirely on the woman who lay beneath him. Luca stared at her, stunned. "You just saved me," he said, his voice low and steady. Emily tried to explain, but her words got lost in fear. He ordered his men, "Take her with us." Luca was not accustomed to being touched, much less being violently tackled to the floor. The shock of the assassination attempt was instantly replaced by the confusion of his survival. He looked at the trembling waitress, seeing the raw terror on her face. Luca stared at her, stunned. He realized that the clumsy, undignified tackle had been a deliberate, heroic act. He saw the genuine, uncalculated fear in her eyes, confirming that her warning was pure and authentic. "You just saved me," he said, his voice low and steady. The words were a quiet declaration of fact, acknowledging the immense, non-negotiable debt he now owed her. Emily scrambled to sit up, desperate to explain the laser, to justify her breach of protocol. Emily tried to explain, but her words got lost in fear. She could only stammer apologies for the broken plates and the chaos, unable to articulate the truth of the red light and the sniper. Luca didn't need an explanation. He had seen the sniper's laser reflected off the glass moments before the shot was fired, and he knew her desperate lunge was a response to that specific, immediate threat. He stood up, regaining his imposing height. His decision was instant. He could not leave the witness, the hero, to the mercy of the police or the lingering threat of his enemies. He looked at his security chief, his order absolute. "Take her with us." The command was non-negotiable. Emily's life, her safety, and her destiny were now entirely intertwined with his. She was no longer a waitress. She was under the direct, absolute protection of the Don. Emily was brought to a hidden mansion on the outskirts of town. She didn't know if she was being protected or imprisoned. The transfer from the gilded cage was executed with surgical precision. Emily, still trembling from shock, was bundled into an armored SUV, accompanied by Luca's silent, formidable security detail. Luca himself rode in the front, his focus entirely on managing the aftermath of the attack and ensuring their safe passage. The destination was not a hospital, but a secure, isolated property on the outskirts of the city. Emily was brought to a hidden mansion on the outskirts of town. It was a sprawling, modern structure surrounded by high walls, state-of-the-art surveillance, and thick groves of trees. It was the antithesis of the crowded, open environment of the city, a perfect safe house. Upon arrival, Emily was immediately led inside. She was given a secure guest suite, provided with clean clothes, and offered a private physician. Despite the unprecedented luxury and the obvious commitment to her safety, her mind was consumed by doubt. She didn't know if she was being protected or imprisoned. The silence of the safe house, the constant veiled presence of the guards, and the absolute removal from her old life made the situation terrifyingly ambiguous. She was a guest in a golden cage, and the keeper was the most dangerous man in the city. Luca appeared later that night, his chest still marked by the near miss. "You could have run," he said. "Why didn't you?" Emily met his gaze and whispered, "Because you're human, too." For the first time in years, Luca didn't know what to say. Luca finally sought her out late that night. He entered her suite alone, having dismissed his security detail outside the door. He was no longer in his tailored suit, but in dark, casual clothes, and the sight of him was less intimidating, but no less powerful. He sat across from her, his posture rigid. His chest was still marked by the near miss. A faint, raw line traced the path the bullet had almost taken, a constant, visible reminder of the life she had saved. He needed to understand the reason behind her sacrifice. He expected fear, a demand for money, or a desperate plea for release. "You could have run," he said. His voice was low, carrying the exhaustion and the weight of the day's events. "When you saw the chaos, you could have fled. Why didn't you?" Emily met his gaze, her dark eyes clear. Despite the fatigue, she had prepared for this question. She knew she had to appeal not to the boss, but to the man she had seen under the cold facade. Emily met his gaze and whispered, "Because you're human, too." The simple statement shattered the final barrier. The profound truth of her observation, that she saw his vulnerability, his fear, and his basic humanity, despite his power, silenced him. He had built his reputation on being untouchable, a cold force of nature. Emily had effortlessly dismantled that lie. For the first time in years, Luca didn't know what to say. The words were the key to his isolation, and she had just handed him the truth, entirely free of charge. The debt he owed her was not financial. It was existential. Luca's men discovered the sniper was hired by a rival family. But something didn't add up. The hitman knew exactly where Luca would sit. The immediate aftermath of the assassination attempt transformed Luca's safe house into a relentless hub of intelligence. While Emily recovered physically and emotionally, Luca's entire organization was focused on identifying the forces behind the coordinated attack. Luca's priority was not revenge yet, but intelligence. He needed to understand the depth of the conspiracy before making his decisive countermove. Lorenzo, Luca's security chief, delivered the initial findings. The sniper, who was neutralized moments after the shot, was a highly skilled external contractor, indicating the attack was not a random act of violence, but a professional hit. Luca's men discovered the sniper was hired by a rival family, the formidable Falcone organization, who had long sought to dismantle Luca's territorial advantage. The fact that the Falcones were behind the operation was expected. The rivalry was historical and intense. However, the critical flaw in the attack's execution immediately concerned Luca. The sniper had chosen a perfect vantage point, timed the shot flawlessly, and had the trajectory calculated for Luca's exact position at his customary corner table. But something didn't add up. The hitman knew exactly where Luca would sit. The table was often reserved, but Luca's actual seating choice was based on unpredictable factors and last-minute decisions. Only someone with intimate, real-time knowledge of Luca's movements, or someone who had meticulously planned the entire evening's seating arrangements could have provided the hitman with such precise data. The realization was cold, surgical, and terrifying. The threat was not merely external. It was internal. The Falcone family had a mole deeply embedded within the Romano syndicate, someone who had willingly betrayed their capo for profit or power. Luca stared at the intelligence reports, the stark realization confirming his deepest, most dangerous suspicion. Someone he trusted implicitly had sold his life. The betrayal was real. Luca, though innocent, found herself in the middle of a war she didn't understand. Luca ordered a complete, immediate lockdown of all external communications and initiated a silent, invasive audit of his immediate inner circle. The focus was on those who had access to his schedule and his internal security protocols. The pool was horrifyingly small, containing the men who had sworn loyalty to him since childhood, the men he considered his brothers in the code. The psychological toll of this betrayal was immense. Luca, who valued loyalty above all else, felt the profound pain of the treachery. He had always operated under the cynical assumption that everyone had a price. But the identity of the suspected traitor, a high-ranking lieutenant named S, was a devastating blow. S had been with Luca for over a decade. The betrayal was real. Luca realized that the sophisticated criminal empire he commanded was utterly vulnerable from within. His power was being used against him. Emily, though innocent, found herself in the middle of a war she didn't understand. Confined to the safe house, Emily remained the involuntary core of the conflict. She didn't understand the rules of the Camorra, the protocols, or the hierarchy, but she understood the raw, terrifying reality that her act of courage had plunged her into a world of lethal consequence. Luca guarded her fiercely, knowing she was the living witness, the ultimate evidence of his vulnerability and his humanity. The internal fracture, Luca isolates the threat, but recognizes the immense cost of distrust. Luca isolated S, subtly removing him from critical duties while simultaneously escalating the covert surveillance. He knew he could not eliminate S without definitive proof that would satisfy the organization's moral code and justify the internal upheaval. Luca was fighting a battle on two fronts, externally against the Falcones and internally against the cancer of betrayal. He recognized the immense cost of the unfolding situation, the trauma inflicted upon Emily, the breakdown of trust within his organization, and the psychological burden of perpetual suspicion. He was moving toward a truth that would either solidify his power or destroy his soul. Days passed, and Emily's fear slowly turned into curiosity. Luca wasn't what she expected. Beneath the ruthless reputation, he was fiercely loyal to those he loved. The safe house became Emily's new, paradoxical reality. The constant, invisible presence of danger was the norm. Yet, the immense protection offered by Luca created a strange sense of peace. Days passed, and Emily's fear slowly turned into curiosity. She realized that the terror of his reputation was mostly external. Internally, Luca was a man of intense, controlled focus, driven by a profound, if dark, sense of justice. She began to observe Luca during their shared, guarded meals and brief conversations. Luca, under the pretense of keeping her informed, shared details of his life, the history of his family, the code of the syndicate, and his frustration with the pervasive dishonesty of his world. Emily realized that Luca wasn't what she expected. He wasn't a senseless brute. He was an intellectual, a strategist who valued loyalty above all else, which made the internal betrayal of his lieutenant so devastating. Beneath the ruthless reputation, he was fiercely loyal to those he loved. She saw the genuine pain in his eyes when he spoke of the betrayal, the pain of a man who had trusted deeply and been wounded catastrophically. Her initial gratitude had evolved into a deep respect, and from that respect, a consuming, dangerous affection began to bloom. She was drawn to the strength he radiated, but more powerfully to the hidden vulnerability she alone had witnessed. One evening, she caught him looking at her with something like gratitude, maybe even admiration. "You're different," he said quietly. The fragile intimacy. Luca's intense security work meant he was often absent, but when he returned, he always sought out Emily. He wasn't just checking on his protected asset. He was seeking the emotional clarity she provided. One evening, Luca returned exhausted from a day of confronting silent enemies. He found Emily in the library reading a book she had brought from the restaurant, a classic novel, an escape from their current reality. He stood in the doorway observing her, letting his guard down slightly. She looked up and their eyes met. One evening, she caught him looking at her with something like gratitude, maybe even admiration. It was a profound, vulnerable gaze, the look of a man who realized his salvation lay in the woman before him. He walked over and sat across from her. "You're different," he said quietly. "You saw the gun. You saw the blood. And you chose to stay. Everyone else runs for money or safety. You ran for an honest conscience." Emily smiled faintly, realizing his admiration was rooted in her moral courage. "I ran because I saw the fear in your eyes, Luca, and I knew you were fighting for your life. That's worth more than any job." The fragile intimacy established a profound connection. They were two isolated people, one by wealth and power, the other by necessity, who had found honesty in the most dishonest of worlds. One morning, Alessandro received a message that changed everything. Someone had been feeding information to his enemies using Elena's translations. The brief period of hope Alessandro experienced after confirming Elena's identity was abruptly shattered by the chilling reality of his world. He had deployed his intelligence assets to monitor all communications surrounding his businesses, attempting to isolate the source of the persistent leaks. One morning, deep within the secured communications vault of his villa, Alessandro received an encrypted message from a fiercely loyal external operative, a man whose life he had saved years ago. The operative had intercepted and decrypted a communication log between a high-ranking member of the rival family and someone deeply embedded within the Romano organization. The log confirmed not only the ongoing conspiracy, but the terrifying personal nature of the betrayal. One morning, Alessandro received a message that changed everything. The data was undeniable. Someone had been feeding information to his enemies using Elena's translations. The implication was horrifying. The mole had manipulated the source documents before they reached Elena, or more likely, used the highly sensitive information Elena translated for Alejandro to confirm crucial strategic details for the rivals. The information leakage was systematic, precise, and lethal. The traitor was exploiting Elena's integrity and the trust Alejandro placed in her. The evidence pointed relentlessly to Vincenzo, Alejandro's long-term capo regime, a man who managed the syndicate's complex logistics and had been a pillar of the organization for 2 decades. Vincenzo was the only one with the necessary access, the deep connections, and the tactical knowledge to execute such a devastating, intimate betrayal. Alejandro felt the profound sickness of betrayal worse than any wound, knowing the attack came from within his own chosen family. She was devastated. "It wasn't me," he didn't answer. His silence hurt more than anger ever could. The shock and rage were quickly superseded by the painful necessity of confronting Elena. Alessandro knew the immediate psychological consequence of his discovery would be the revelation shattered Elena, the crushing of her trust complete. Alessandro entered the secure living area where she sat reading, his face a frozen mask of cold, tightly controlled fury. Wordlessly, he placed the encrypted message log on the table before her. Elena's eyes scanned the accusation, the overwhelming weight of evidence all pointing to internal betrayal. The information sunk in, and she slowly came to the dreadful realization of the immense danger they were in. But when her eyes caught the subtle, insidious implication that her very translations had been somehow used for the betrayal, her fear mutated into a profound, soul-crushing shame and anguish. "It wasn't me," she cried out, her voice cracking and breaking under the weight of the accusation. She knew the absolute purity of her intentions, but the cold, hard evidence seemed to paint her as complicit. She looked at Alessandro, her eyes pleading, begging for a level of trust that transcended the damning written proof laid out before them. Alessandro, however, remained stoic, maintaining a rigid, terrifying silence. He didn't feel the need to speak. The raw, unfiltered data spoke volumes on its own. Besides, showing even a flicker of weakness before neutralizing the internal threat was far too great a risk to take. He didn't offer a single word in response. His very lack of an immediate defense, his cold, professional silence, pierced her far more deeply than any angry verbal accusation ever could have. His silence, devoid of any warmth or reassurance, hurt more than anger ever could have. It confirmed her deepest, most hidden fear, that despite the intensity of their connection, the foundational wall of his inherent cynicism remained stubbornly intact, always ready and willing to sacrifice trust on the altar of security. Guards arrived and took her to a stark, empty room, locking the heavy door behind her. She cried inconsolably through the long, dark night, completely unsure if she would even live to see the next morning dawn. To buy himself precious time and manage the immediate, escalating danger, Alessandro knew he had to maintain the carefully crafted appearance of ruthless, decisive action. He absolutely had to isolate the suspect, who, based solely on the evidence presented, could easily be interpreted as Elena. This, he hoped, would lure the real traitor out into the open, flushing them from the shadows. He summoned 2 silent, trusted guards, men he knew were trained only in absolute obedience. He looked at Elena, his face carefully impassive, and delivered the chilling order that sealed her immediate fate. Escort her to the secure tower room. No communication, no visitors. Adesso. The guards, trained only to follow orders without question, immediately complied. Elena, now realizing with a sickening lurch that she was now a prisoner of the very man she had saved, offered no resistance. She walked numbly to the tower room, the chilling fear of the underworld now combining with the devastating, almost unbearable pain of emotional betrayal. Guards led her to a room and locked the door. She cried through the night, unsure if she'd live to see the next morning. The suffocating silence of her makeshift prison was a terrifying, deafening echo of the deafening silence of Alessandro's doubt. It was Marco, Luca's trusted right-hand man, the one he least suspected. He confessed that a rival gang had promised him unimaginable power in exchange for eliminating Luca. When Luca confronted him with the irrefutable evidence, all hell broke loose. A violent gunfight erupted, and Emily, without hesitation, once again found herself shielding him, screaming desperately for him to duck as bullets tore through the room. The discovery of the expertly hidden tracker and Emily's timely warning allowed Luca to launch a swift, precisely targeted counteroperation. He knew instinctively that the betrayal had to originate from someone with intimate knowledge of his daily schedule and the vehicles he used. A small, tight-knit circle of trust. The accumulating evidence pointed inexorably to the one man he least suspected, the man who had been his loyal shadow, his confidant, for years, Marco, his own right-hand man. Luca arranged a highly controlled meeting in a neutral, secure office, carefully bringing Marco in under completely false pretenses, assuring him it was just another routine meeting. Luca, armed with the damning evidence of the tracker and the intercepted communications, consciously chose honesty over further deception for the initial confrontation. "Marco?" Luca began, his voice icy cold, completely devoid of the warmth and emotion that usually colored their everyday exchanges. "The tracker on my car, the leaks of information, the meticulously planned ambush. Why?" Marco's carefully constructed facade immediately shattered, crumbling into dust. He confessed everything, consumed by a toxic blend of deep-seated resentment and gnawing fear. He had been promised control over significant assets and a strategic partnership with the rival family in exchange for permanently eliminating Luca. He confessed that the rival gang had promised him absolute power in exchange for Luca's death. He saw Luca softening, becoming weakened due to his obvious affection for Emily. He viewed this shift as a critical weakness that needed to be purged for the organization's long-term stability, and he deeply resented Luca's seemingly unassailable power. The confrontation, however, was violently and unexpectedly interrupted. Marco, anticipating the very real possibility of exposure, had secretly arranged a final, desperate contingency. A small, hand-picked team of his most loyal followers stationed just outside the building, ready to strike with deadly force if he didn't give them the all-clear signal. When Marco failed to give the prearranged signal, the waiting assassins immediately moved in. Chaos instantly erupted. A brutal gunfight broke out within the supposedly secure office building. Emily, who had stubbornly insisted on being present in an adjacent room with Lorenzo, rushed headlong into the fray the moment she heard the first gunshot. She saw Luca completely exposed, pinned down by a withering hail of gunfire. Driven by the same raw, primal instinct that had saved his life the first time, Emily threw herself directly into the line of fire, once again putting her own life on the line to save his. Emily once again found herself shielding him, screaming desperately for him to duck as bullets tore through the room, ripping through walls and furniture. She covered him, physically forcing him to take cover, bravely absorbing the terror, but never, ever letting go. The silent truth revealed itself in that moment. Marco is quickly subdued, and the undeniable extent of Emily's selfless courage solidified the already strong bond between them. The gunfight was brief but brutally intense. Luca, fighting with the cold, controlled ferocity of a man desperately defending his very future, worked seamlessly with Lorenzo to neutralize the immediate threat. Marco, the architect of the entire betrayal, was finally subdued, now facing the immediate, devastating consequences of his own blinding greed. When the dust finally settled, Luca was physically injured but, miraculously, still alive. He looked at Emily, covered in dust and debris, her voice hoarse from screaming, but alive and miraculously safe. He realized in that instant that she had willingly sacrificed her own safety for him not just once, but twice. Her extraordinary courage indelibly solidified the bond between them, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that her loyalty was absolute. The final, crushing betrayal by Marco served as the ultimate confirmation of Emily's inherent integrity. Luca knew with unwavering certainty that he could never doubt her again. After the dust settled, Luca approached Emily with quiet awe. "You've saved me twice," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You risked your life for someone like me. Why?" Emily's eyes softened, radiating a gentle warmth. "Because everyone deserves a second chance." The raw violence of the intense confrontation within the office building gradually subsided, leaving behind a chaotic scene of destruction and a profound emotional residue. Luca, stabilized by Lorenzo and the remaining loyal guards, immediately focused all of his attention on Emily, who was visibly trembling but, thankfully, physically unharmed. Having now survived 2 separate assassination attempts in his defense, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving Luca feeling wounded but utterly resolute. He knew that the debt he owed her was now immeasurable, and he desperately needed to articulate the profound transformation she had wrought in his life. After the immediate danger had passed, Luca approached Emily with quiet awe. He completely ignored his own seeping wound, kneeling carefully beside her, his voice low and raw with reverence. "You've saved me twice," he said, wanting to fully acknowledge the complete measure of her incredible courage. The initial warning against the hidden sniper and the subsequent physical shield she provided during the gunfight. "You risked your life for someone like me. Why?" The deeply felt question represented the final surrender of his inherently cynical self. He was genuinely asking her to explain the seemingly illogical reason for her unwavering love and her selfless sacrifice, something that completely defied the cold, hard rules of the dangerous world he inhabited. Emily, seeing the profound, raw vulnerability shining in his usually guarded eyes, responded with the simple, unvarnished truth that resided deep within her heart. Emily's eyes softened because everyone deserves a second chance. Her simple answer was the ultimate absolution, the complete forgiveness he had never thought possible. She wasn't just speaking about his future, about his opportunity to leave the darkness behind. She was speaking about the very depths of his soul. She saw the good man he could be, the decent human being buried beneath layers of cynicism and violence, and she risked absolutely everything for that potential. Luca realized in that instant that Emily wasn't just brave. She was the one person who could genuinely see the man behind the title, the inherent good and his commitment to honesty. Luca absorbed her simple words, letting them sink deep into his heart. He realized that Emily wasn't just brave. She was the embodiment of the faith he had long since lost. She saw his inherent humanity when he himself could only see the monster the world had created. Luca realized she wasn't just brave. She was the one person who saw the man behind the title. The conviction solidified his final vow. He would dismantle his criminal life, not just for his own safety and well-being, but to be worthy of the unwavering integrity she so effortlessly represented. He would willingly sacrifice his vast criminal empire for the sake of the only asset that truly mattered, their future together. He looked directly at her, his voice firm and resolute, imbued with a newfound ethical authority. "The violence ends, Emily. All of it. I'm choosing the man you saved." Weeks later, the small restaurant quietly reopened, now free from the heavy shadows of fear and intimidation. Emily returned to her beloved job, stubbornly insisting on returning to work, needing the dignity and satisfaction of honest labor. But this time, a sleek black car was often parked discreetly outside. Luca, now fully recovered and having legally transitioned away from his former life, would sit quietly at his usual table, peacefully watching her work. He wasn't there for the food or for any lingering need for surveillance. He was there for the profound peace and tranquility she brought him simply by existing. The city whispered constantly about their strange, unconventional bond, the waitress who saved the powerful Mafia boss. But for them, it wasn't about power dynamics or ingrained fear. It was simply about fate. It was about the extraordinary night that a single, selfless act of courage had irrevocably changed 2 lives forever. Luca approached her on her final shift, his face radiant with genuine love and a newfound sense of unwavering purpose. He asked her, with a humble sincerity, to leave the restaurant for good and finally marry him. Emily, without any hesitation, tearfully accepted his heartfelt proposal. Their enduring love was the ultimate triumph of inherent character over the crushing weight of circumstance. The city continued to whisper incessantly about their strange, improbable bond, the ordinary waitress who had somehow saved the powerful Mafia boss. But for them, it was never about power or fear or social standing. It was simply about destiny. It was about that singular night when one small act of selfless courage had irrevocably changed two lives forever. For the better.